and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode I'll be discussing Sony Animation's 2015's gruesomely funny animation sequel, Hotel Transylvania 2, as directed once again by Genndy Tartakovsky, following on from his debut with the first movie in the series, 2012's Hotel Transylvania. Now, before I get started, as I go along, I do want to talk about something that will spoil the ending of this film. So, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, please do switch off now. But of course, please do come back to SciFirst MovieTalk and let me know what you thought of the film when you do check it out. Please do. Okay, though, are you ready? It's not for a while, but it will be there. So, the movie sets off where we last left off in the last movie and sees Mavis, as voiced by Selena Gomez, and Jonny, as voiced by Samberg, getting married after they zinged and fell in love in the first movie. With Mavis being a vampire and Jonny being a human, this is sure to cause some confusion, of course, apprehension, and even a disemboweling or two on the guest list, of course. But times have changed and monsters are now living amongst the humans, even staying at the Hotel Transylvania with a new and improved itinerary. Well, sort of. Anywho, as time passes, Mavis and Jonny have a child, Dennis, as voiced by Blinkoff, and Mavis's father, none other than Dracula himself, as voiced by Adam Sandler, couldn't be happier with the pitter-patter of tiny vampire feet at the hotel. Only thing is, little Dennis does not yet have his fangs, as we then see him grow up to his kind of 5th birthday, the last moment he has to get them. They show no signs of popping through at all. So Drac hatches a plan to usurp his daughter and sends her and Jonny packing to California, while he and the rest of the monsters take Dennis on a monstrously fantastic adventure to show him what being a monster is all about and bring forth those vampire canines. So, this sequel takes the classic monster vibe once again and brings us a mashup of old and new monsters as they're kind of adjusting to life living amongst the humans. And in that, the human this time around, I must say, kind of centres around the humans' reactions to the monsters as they start to kind of interact with the world outside. And some of these are absolutely priceless. In this, though, some of the magic that we had in the first movie, kind of coming from the portrayal of these classic monsters, it is lost, building less on their kind of heritage this time around, and indeed straying away from the kind of classic monster movies of old, and even bringing forth a number of newcomers and new creations to the fold. All the favourites are back, though, from the first movie, apart from a core few. So this time around, we don't really get much interaction from many others. Of course, as the series now kind of slants, adding it kind of skews inevitably as we get more and more characters to interact with, of course, and thus kind of diluting the pool from which to select. The zombies from the first movie are back, and they are as fantastic as ever. We really don't kind of see enough of them in this movie, though, not like we did in the last. And for some reasons, for the same reasons, to be fair, as I've kind of just stated. In fact, quite a lot of the movie doesn't even take place in the hotel this time around. And so apart from the kind of start, they really are somewhat sidelined, which is a complete shame. Frankenstein, as voiced once again by Kevin James, is still great too, though, and steals the scene on a number of occasions. The rest of the characters there, and they have their fair share of funny moments between them, don't get me wrong, really don't get me wrong. But in this outing, they do sort of take a back seat, so to speak. But for me, it was Jonny's family and how that kind of brought it home this time round. These were new introductions to the cast this time around, but it was priceless to see them kind of trying to make it work with Mavis and her family, and indeed the rest of the monsters. Of course, with hilarious consequences, but with an all-out kind of real feel when, of course, you meet the in-laws and they do try to be accepting. But you know that kind of for whatever reason, they just don't get you, Being there got the t-shirt. But perseverance is key, believe you me. And indeed, the love that they show for their family, and indeed Mavis, Jonny and Dennis, it really does feel real. It's just going to take some time to adjust. It is less punchy than the first. It doesn't feel to have that kind of same energy that the first had. But the family vibe is stronger than ever now, I think. as is the message of acceptance. And for the most part, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, that's my spoiler, between the kind of pull of the monster and the human worlds. It has more of an emotional core woven into its plot this time around in this respect. We even introduced Dracula's famed and feared traditionalist father, Vlad, as voiced by Mel Brooks, who hasn't seen his grandson at all, in fear that he would kind of reject the fact that he was human. And to some extent, he does. But even this, the film serves to warm, his cold heart in the end. But also what I would say is that while there is still plenty of comedy to be had, and indeed total mishaps as our hapless bunch of monsters do try and get, back into scaring, only to find, that today's more hardened public do need something a little bit more than a wobbly jolly Frankenstein and a tired old wolf to kind of scare them, Turns out monsters just aren't what they are anymore, They're a bit out of practice and kind of set against today's world. They're just not what they once used to be. Anyway, indeed, the comedy's there. Don't get me wrong. It's not quite as on point or as seamless as it was in the first movie. It does seem more forced this time around, but nonetheless, there is still enough monster banter and more than enough comedy to keep you entertained. There really was. But that's not what I had to say about at all. Valid, but I did go off point a little bit. What I was more about to move on to was the fact that with the introduction of Vlad, there is indeed a mild horror element that's kind of been introduced into the movie. It has a deliberately more dark and macabre vibe at this point, which is something its predecessor didn't have. It's not scary, don't get me wrong. It's still going to be acceptable for the little ones, but it's there nonetheless. It's a point to kind of note. What I really didn't like, however, and here's the spoiler, so do be warned, was the ending. Sure, it was great fun, adventurous, and great to see the team in action at the end. Almost like kind of a monster bash throwdown, But for me, the film had a strong message of acceptance throughout. It didn't matter to Mavis or Jonny that Dennis was human. It didn't matter if he was a vampire. Mavis was championing letting him actually be who he wanted to be and who he would be on his own. And that message is a message we could all get behind. But then in the end, after everything that had been said and kind of preached all along the way through the movie, and indeed rightly so, little Dennis, in fact, became a vampire. Just like that, and everybody was happy. So in the end, all those with prejudice and misgivings towards Dennis being a human were simply validated. And that didn't kind of sit right with me, just right at that end. Perhaps he could have been a hybrid of sorts, a bit like Blade, to balance the argument. Now, that like Blade. Now, that would have been cool. Now, I haven't yet seen the third one at the time of creating this review, so I could be proved wrong. But that wasn't the case in this movie. Additionally, we actually had some strong themes with Mavis now coping and being a parent herself, and kind of struggling to let go in a similar fashion to her dad in the last movie. Although she actually is the most level-headed, responsible, accepting person in the movie. Kind of like the anchor for all of the craziness kind of going on around her. And yet in saying this, the relationship between Mavis and Jonny we now have is far less believable. Jonny hasn't even tried to grow up. And indeed, I don't think I even saw him being a dad. Still very much a slacker, Mavis, on the other hand, is kind of grasping more of the world around her and kind of maturing into herself. And indeed, mother, I'm going to be deep here, Anna, but it was actually nice to kind of see her develop, further as a character, especially as we'd kind of invested into her relationship with her dad in the last movie. And indeed, still made this a kind of coming-of-age story, as Mavis does then embark on the next chapter of her life. That part I did think they got right. Just the balance with the rest of the movie was off in this respect. Overall, though, despite its faults, this is still a very, very entertaining movie and fantastic fun, so don't get me wrong. It is great to see these classic monsters back in action, absolutely, and indeed trying to kind of embrace this brand new world, integrating and living amongst the humans. And although it might not get its message across in quite the right way in the end, for the most part, it really does have a strong message of acceptance. It does. And to be whoever we are at heart, monster or otherwise, The fact that we have pretty much the same team returning both in production and cast who are excellent once again, breathes an air of familiarity in that it more than feels like a worthy sequel indeed. It didn't touch, I didn't touch on this earlier, but indeed the graphics are a lot more adventurous this time around, and parts of the animation do look amazing, I must say. And the scope of the movie is much wider than its predecessor, with us kind of getting to see more of this wider world in which these monsters live. And indeed, little Dennis, dressed as a vampire, is just so cute. Along with his relationship with Winnie, one of the wolf pups, who does take a shine to him in the hope of becoming his Zing. Absolutely adorable. So, that does bring me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk, and definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.